was looking for a space that was big, because sometimes I do really big things, sometimes I do really small things. And I would say that my raw material is space more than any other thing, because my mediums can change pretty radically. And especially if I'm doing a large-scale public project, I may need a lot of studio assistants. So I've had as many as 6 people working full-time for me on a big project, and that takes space as well. The other part of the equation is I have a family. So I raised 2 kids, but during the early part of my career, the struggle was always to provide a home with them, but provide adequate space to do my work. So that took various guises. I had a space over on Florida and 6th Street over here, which was a huge loft space. And the kids lived there with me, and I built a loft within the loft as their bedrooms. But it was not the same as, say, turning a teenager and saying, I need a room with a door that closes.
Yeah.
So we did that for a couple of years. And I had also experimented with having a studio space separate from my living space. That doesn't work for me because I resent commuting. And I know that sounds awful, but I resent 10 minutes of commuting. And the other reason it doesn't work for me is sometimes I'll wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I can come down to my studio here. So I knew that I was aiming towards something where I could live and work. And it wasn't until my kids graduated and I could move from there that my husband and I found this space, and it's perfect. I am very much an urban dweller. That I like the grittiness of neighborhoods. I like Walker's Point because this is kind of the center of where the post-industrial change has taken place, and I grew up in steel towns, and I can see it. Yeah, you can see it in the building itself, but also the Menominee Valley. And this area is not gentrified as yet, and I'm hoping that it will stay a place where there is good work for people to do, companies and living side by side. I am an artist all the time, and that I remember one time my son saying, "Mom, will you stop drawing the chicken and cook it so we're getting kind of hungry here?" And so, and I really think a studio is a state of mind, and that you take it with you. And even and at one point in my life I only had a coffee table as a table to work on, that's just how it is. And so my physical circumstance has risen to who I am. I think that part of the question as a human being, I think that artists should be, in the forefront of change. I think that I'm not, as I define myself as an artist, I don't define myself as somebody that is separated from the rest of life. That's one reason I went into public art. I think that rather than the physical space, I think the real challenge is the people in your life. I'm a workaholic, so I'm very happy with my arrangement. But making enough room in my life for the people I love, that's the challenge. And I don't mean family, because family comes first. I mean friendships and stuff like that. When you live and breathe it 90 days, but if I'm out of this space too long, I don't feel as centered. That even if it's a matter of coming down here and putzing, just to feel connected. A studio is a very different kind of space than a space that you share domestically. I'm always amazed at my students that can share studios that actually work at my ed, and they work, next to one another. Because my practice involves a lot of people sometimes, that I really need a place away from other people. when I say I bring people in, when I have studio assistants, they're an extension of what I'm doing, and I pick them very carefully, and we work very much in tandem. I would come back and I'd survey what they did, and I'd tweak and change, and I'm an artist that works better when my hand is in it. Mm-hmm. As messy as it is, I know where everything is. That the physical place itself doesn't give me agency. You know, when I was a young artist, struggling to get a studio, and I remember once I subletted a space from a furniture designer. I had my own part of the space, and his business went belly up, and the sheriffs came and confiscated everything, including my stuff, because they couldn't tell the difference. It took me quite a number of years to recover from that, because I lost a lot of tools and so on. And yet I didn't feel like I lost any agency. I think as a young artist, when curators and galleries and people approach you, if you don't have a studio, they don't take you seriously. And but I see that a lot, and I remember that feeling. Really felt that was that essential for me as a young artist, because I made the work regardless, and regardless of any of my living circumstances. And I've also traveled and made work while I was traveling, and I've sat in the car the first time when my husband and I were courting. We drove, we knew one another a month, and we decided to drive to Mexico and back, and I drew in the car all the way down and all the way back. And he now and then he'll point in, oh yeah, that was the project that you were working on when we went to Mexico, or that was the project you were working on when we drove to Portland, and that was and that it's I love to drive. I take my turn driving, but when I'm not driving, I'm working, and on planes or whatever else. I think what gives you agency is your work. Something that you learn as an artist, and it has nothing to do with public art, actually, which is after you make the work, you share it with other people. Other people own it. And so they might put a different picture frame on it. They might hang it where you would not choose to hang it, but in fact, they own it. You keep intellectual rights. They cannot destroy the work of art. And that was part of the controversy here. That's, you think that public art is permanent, it's forever, but it's not. Public space is dynamic, it's always changing. There was a lot of discussion as to what this space could mean in the future, and that future wasn't realized. I feel passionately about my work, but I also feel that, people come first, and my real heartbreak in this is that there are people that have issues that should be addressed, and this is not the way to address them. And in fact, there was a worse situation here in Milwaukee than there was with the Philosophers Stone, there was a piece called, I think it's called Peter John, by an artist named John Raimondi, and it was on 4th and Michigan, and the work was destroyed. It was taken down, and the Arts Board here didn't.
That was recent.
That was recent, and it was destroyed. And the artist was consulted, but the artist didn't have money to do something different. Likewise, I was consulted in this, and so what is actually part of the plan with the Philosopher's Stones is they will be removed and put into storage, with the thought that they will be put back. And so the mayor felt that he had to do something, and I think the mayor had made his decision, and though engineering agreed with me, the city engineering, the Arts Board, and these were big meetings of people. The last meeting there were 50 people, and everyone was, saying they love the piece, they love it, they just feel desperate. And my heart goes out to both the people that are having the protests and also to the business owners that can't live with it. And my heart goes out to them because I don't have a solution that is, art doesn't solve these things. I can't say that it was disrespected. I think that the Arts Board in Madison and I think the community respected the work and they were acting out of desperation. This isn't the end of the story, it's what it comes down to. We came to an understanding that I'm comfortable with. That doesn't mean that I agree with it, but I'm comfortable with it. In total, there are 55 stones. They take out 11. There are 44 stones. I don't see how this is going to change the behavior of people that feel passionate about a cause and that are installing themselves one block away from the state capitol.
Mm-hmm.
Taking out 11 stones isn't going to change that, and I think they're going to find that. I'm very much part of inhabiting it as I start to envision it. And that sounds complicated, but I think my training as an artist, which is basically you kind of spelunk, your humanness when you look at a blank piece of paper and are going to do a drawing, and it's not much different than that. It's like learning what that canvas or that piece of paper or that raw material is that's the raw material you work with, and that the physical things that are generated are I see them as an inevitable outcome to what I understand from that situation. I guess the other thing is I have to connect with it in some way. So I'd use the example of Fleet Street. That was a group of block clubs, and when I lived in River West, I was a block club captain on and off for a long time. And I care very much. Block clubs, I think, are just, that's, democracy at the base level. And so I could relate to them, what it was that I could begin to envision something that would bring them together. And I had been there, and I had felt that, had that experience. So I don't usually take on spaces that don't in some way resonate, even if it's out of town. I think we're in an era where there's less government funding and more community raising. Community arts is a different thing than public art, and I think a lot of what I see that people will call public art, I call community arts. Murals very often are that. So community arts, I see it as regional. I see it as accessible. I think that when I talk about working with a community, I give them something that they would never envision. And that's where it takes it someplace else. I also have done some commissions which are more, you're an artist, do a sculpture for us. And that's what a lot of the larger monuments are about. And I think there are times where that's appropriate. I create spaces, but sometimes I create objects that become like a focal point or that do something in a different way. What I find fascinating is that public art is debated. There was an article in the newspaper this morning, and it's for a monument that this is in Moscow, and there's a big controversy. Tens of thousands of people have signed a petition against a piece. It's supposed to be a statue of Saint Vladimir, and not Vladimir Putin, but Saint Vladimir. And that Kiev has one, but Moscow doesn't have one, and they want it to be 62 feet high on a hill. Now, some people call that public art. I call that, public monuments. And history has proven that those things come and go. That community arts and public monuments like that have something in common, which is the fluctuating perspectives. So a neighborhood changes. A neighborhood is gentrified. The first thing to go are all the murals that were there because they expressed somebody else. A regime is toppled. The first thing that happens, and in fact, it's always front page news when they bring down, statues of Saddam Hussein, for example. In fact, often those are staged for the camera, but the truth is they do come down as well. And I personally, the work that I'm engaged in and how the public art, I don't see public art as different than other art in that it speaks to something longer and more and deeper, something that sustains. And so the question is, how can you create work that sustains over time, that isn't just bound in the small perspective of the moment? Mm-hmm. What I find interesting is layering. I am as much interested in temporary projections of films in public space. I'm just as interested in the Civil War monument as I am in that. I'm interested in anything that has subtext that continues to layer who we are. And I find it amazing that people will argue about a public art piece, but anybody can put up any building they want. Ugly buildings. There will be sites like down by the lakefront. There's a lot of controversy about what could go down there, because then those kinds of spaces have a vista that the lakefront belongs to all of us, and so there's more care taken with that. Yesterday I was taking a walk with a friend, walking a dog, and walked past his house. It had so many tchotchkes all over it. It was just really a trip. But, it's their house. They can do it. And, unless, surely their neighbors can go, to the city and complain about them, but the likelihood of it going anyplace is not much. And so why is it that we argue, why is we have a higher standard for public art? That's an interesting question, because somehow we feel it has to speak for all of us. But when it comes to something that is living with us, everybody has an opinion, and I don't think the best art always comes by consensus. And community arts is always art by consensus, and it should be. This is a legitimate thing, but it's not an arena that I work in. Part of the reason I know that teaching was a calling is because I never intended to teach. I thought that I would spend time in industry, which I did for quite a while, and then wean my way away from industry to being a full-time artist. And then I ended up teaching and realizing that this was a way in which you affect the world, and mainly because I was a woman teaching sculpture, and women weren't teaching sculpture, that I didn't have to talk about being a feminist. All I had to do was be a woman that was teaching sculpture, and I could change the world. And I went, that's easy. The teaching's not easy, but being in the position and changing the world is easy. I know. Well, I mentioned Teach for America because I've had, several students over the last few years who very, very good students. One of Sarah Wold, who was one of my Madison students on the Union Project, and go-getter, really strong young woman, and had a lot of ideas, but her degree was in art history, and so she wasn't sure where she was going to go when she taught for America. And so her in particular, but I've heard this from other former students of mine, which is the idea is you take somebody with a bachelor's degree and just, so they know something. Yes, they do know something. She knows art history. She really knows art history. You throw them into an inner city school in some city that they've never even visited before and expect them to teach. I mean, haven't we learned that, who benefits from that? It's the same. Here's the irony. It's very much like the Peace Corps, which is that the people that benefit are the teachers and the people that were the Peace Corps people. The communities don't benefit from that. Just because somebody has a bachelor's degree doesn't mean they can teach. And I didn't think I was going to teach, and then I just realized actually, like I said, it's a calling, and you need a lot of commitment. And the only way these schools are going to be better is to have, young educators who know what they're walking into and are prepared to make a difference. When you use the term creative industry, that is a very contemporary idea. And it doesn't mean that that's the only dimension that there is to being artists and making art, and how art fits into culture. I think there will always be people that create art because they want to explore important ideas. And so, for example, I think some important ideas right now that artists are exploring have to do with the environment, and that the way to explore them through art is very different than it is through science. And that's not about creative industry. That's about really taking hold and responsibility for who we are on this planet. And art can be part of that. So last year, Brad Fiore had written something about how art school kind of leads you on. Like, you're going to get a degree and then you're going to be able to get a job being an artist. Well, there are no jobs to be an artist. Well, of course. I mean, that's why people want to be artists. It's because they don't want the same kind of life as other people. And it isn't a job. It hasn't been, and it's, whenever it's been commodified that way as a job, it doesn't really work. And though I love, say, for example, the WPA, where people were paid to paint murals and so forth, it also had a run of relevance for a moment. And so I think it's fascinating that an economist from Columbia asked me to write something which I still haven't done, and it's 3 weeks overdue, on the relationship of artists to money. And I know that my first line of what I'm writing is to say, I often say to young artists, don't ever let anyone come between you and your money karma, because you don't choose it. The times are what they are, and they choose you. You are chosen to be in this time, and so you have to deal with that. So I personally balk at, thinking about it as a creative industry, because what we see, you asked earlier about public art, like the government started to really regulate that. We lost the NEA for visual artists because of controversy. And in fact, what people don't realize is that federal money has been used in the arts for every time there is money in art and a relationship, there's an agenda. And so for young artists, the agenda may be, how am I able to sustain myself, make a living, and make art? Sometimes the two don't happen at the same time. And that what I find really terrific is that there's no one answer. Every young artist is going to have to look for something else. And they're going to do things that they think are totally irrelevant. So an example I'll give you from my life is I spent 3 years sitting at a drill press drilling holes in circuit boards. Now one would say, and as I was drilling them, I'm going, I am wasting my life. I have a degree in art. What the hell am I doing here? In fact, I can organize, a group of people to fabricate something like nobody's business. Had I not worked in a factory where the job was collectively, we are making this happen, each of us has a piece of this puzzle, and we must collaborate to do that. I mean, that's something that I have as a skill. Most of the young artists that are graduating from my ed will never, have never, and will never work in a factory. It happens to be one of my unique skill sets, whether I wanted it or not. And all young artists are going to get hit with certain things that they have to do. Work in a coffee shop, maybe it is, or maybe, I teach a public art class, and some of our recent graduates are doing projects, public projects, and to actually turn that into a way of life. I like to think of it as a way of life, and I like to think of it as individuals. I don't like to think of it as an industry, because an industry starts to, it's like colleges are an industry. When colleges became an industry, then you also lost something. Mm-hmm. Well, 20 years ago, the real controversy among faculty members in an art school was over what was called professionalism. That's an article that I mentioned. So, the artist, the soul artist, the romance was one model, and then the model of professional, like to act professionally. This is what you need to do. You need to put together slide sheets, you need to go to New York, you need to get a gallery. These are the steps you need to be a professional artist. Those are still all viable. Those are still an option, but those were not taught. And now they're being taught. And now that they're being taught, that's not enough, because in fact there's no formula for success. That the success, how you define success is how each person defines success. I see artists as, like the postman or the president of the corporation, is that we should be sutured into the life of communities, not as something separate. But that's my opinion. And if you do that, then the paths open up. What I'm not hearing conversations about very often anymore is what is meaningful, what makes good art. And my job as a teacher too is, sometimes other people in the class won't see if a person there's something there, and sometimes the work looks like a piece of garbage that they threw together the night before, and you go, oh, but there's potential there. Mm-hmm. And, the potential doesn't come from being professional. It comes from inspiration.